It seems like a lot of people are confused by the Assistant API. And OpenAI actually did not make it easy to kind of see what it is in reality. It made it sound like it's something totally new, while in reality, it's something pretty familiar for a lot of people. And people were doing it already with external libraries like LangChain and so on. Everything that you are able, almost everything that you are able to do with the Assistant API was something that you were able to do before, or you already do with ChatGPT right now, but it's packaged and with some extra spices and extra cost. In this video, I'm hoping to simplify what the Assistant API is and what an assistant is in OpenAI's terms, and help you kind of see it for what it is. So let's look at the assistant. The assistant has 4 main components. You have the model, you have the files, you have what they call threads, and you have tools. These 4 ingredients make the assistant. So what is the model? The model, if you map it to the human, it's basically the brain of the model, of the assistant. For example, you can choose right now between GPT 3.5 or GPT-4. GPT-4 is a more advanced model, so it's a smarter brain, but it's a lot more expensive. Also, you have the files. The files are basically your long-term memory. It's the books you give your assistant, and then the assistant decides to open them to give you an answer. It looks through its memory and gives you the answer. Then you have threads. And threads are basically the short-term memory of the assistant. It's the conversation you're already having with it, and it can remember what the conversation is. It can remember what it told you, but when it starts a new conversation, or if it's having multiple conversations at the same time, that memory is not really saved. And then finally, you have the tools, and the tools are basically the skills and that your assistant have. You can give it. For example, OpenAI provided tools like the code interpreter, so it can run code, that's a skill. Or you can create your own tool and give it to it, maybe a calculator for your business or something. So let's look a little bit deeper now that we have an overall idea of the 4 core components of the assistant. The assistant takes 4 inputs when you create it. The first one, and the most important one, is the model. You tell it you are a GPT 3.5 or a GPT 4 model. Maybe in the future there will be more. And you also give it an instruction. An instruction is basically what we used to call the system prompt, or we still call it that in the normal GPT 4 API. And that's basically the character you want this assistant to play at. You basically tell it, oh, you are someone who's really good at software engineering. That's an example. And then third, you give it the tools. The tools, as we said, it's something that the assistant can use to give you an answer, or crunch some numbers, or do something in the real world, like send a message on WhatsApp or something. And then you have the files. And by the way, you do not have to include tools in your assistant, and you do not have to include files. If you don't, you end up with ChatGPT. But if you do, then you can have a lot more useful assistant. And then once you created the assistant can have many conversations. Now you have this entity called the assistant, and every time you want to talk with it, you basically create a thread, or maybe say you host an assistant that is a chatbot on a website. Every customer that is talking to that chatbot creates a thread, starts a new thread with that assistant, and that's the conversation. So a thread is nothing new. It's what we already do when we talk to ChatGPT, and it's you send it a message, it gives you an answer. You send it another message, it gives you an answer, and so on. So let's dig deeper into the 4 inputs of the assistant. First, you have the instruction, which is something very simple. As we said, it's just what we used to call the system prompt. You can still do it in the GPT-4 API, and it's you are a very good software engineer or something like that. Then you have the model. The model right now you have the choice between GPT-4 and GPT-3.5. GPT-4 is, as we said, the smarter model, but it comes at a cost. It can fit up to 128K context, and the input per token is $0.01. So you can imagine multiplying the size of the context with the amount of with the price of one token. I think that's per 1,000 tokens. So you can end up paying over $1 if you have if you actually fill that context. Then you have GPT 3.5, which is our familiar ChatGPT. Now it's improved a little bit since recently at like following instructions and things like that. And GPT 3.5 is probably the right choice for 90% of people doing things like AI automation and so on, as you don't need the extra smartness of GPT-4 to do a lot of that. And it's 10 times cheaper for input tokens and more than 10 times cheaper for output tokens. And it can fit up to a pretty decent now 16K tokens. So yeah, it's probably the right choice for most people. Even things like language learning can probably work just fine with GPT 3.5. Next, we have tools. And as we said, tools can be either provided by OpenAI or you can provide your own tools. Right now, OpenAI provides two main tools, the retrieval and the code interpreter. So the retrieval is if you upload a huge file that does not fit in the context. I'm not sure if they bill you for that anyway, but right now you get charged $0.2 per gigabyte per day when you use the retrieval for every file that you include. And second, you have the code interpreter, which is charged at $0.03 per session. So every time, I believe, you start, ChatGPT tries to use the code interpreter, you pay that amount. Also, you can provide your own tools, and this could be something like another API. For example, this would be the DALL-E API. It's not provided. I mean, maybe in the future they would just include it in the OpenAI provided ones, but right now it's not. So what you can do, you can just include it as a tool for ChatGPT, tell it like the API specification, and then it will create images for you. Or you can create your own custom tool for your maybe business or client. Maybe it's like a specific business calculator or something, and you can host that and tell the assistant how to use it. And this is something that you already can do. You cannot use the OpenAI provided tools in the normal GPT-4 API or GPT 3.5, but you can do the function calling. So in a way, the most useful part of the assistant API is something that you already have access to in GPT 3.5 and 4. And then finally, you have the files. And then the files, at first I thought maybe when you create the assistant, you upload the files. But the way it works is you first upload the files to OpenAI, and then they give you a file ID. And then when you want to use these files, there's two ways of using them. You either include them as part of your assistant. So for example, your assistant is a doctor, and then you include a bunch of medical resources as files for the assistant. The other option is to just upload the file in your conversation, which is like in a single thread. And in this way, maybe it's something like a research paper that you want to ask questions about, or a YouTube video transcript or something like that. In that way, the assistant can just answer questions about this in this conversation, but it wouldn't know about it in other conversations, which makes a lot of sense for a lot of use cases. And if you're wondering how does OpenAI use these files, then it's actually pretty simple. If the file is small, they just put it directly in the context. And as we said, the context for, say, if you're using GPT-4, can fit up to 300 pages with 128K tokens. So that means you might, if you upload a book that's 300 pages, you might be paying over $1 per query if you're using GPT-4. And then if it's like too big, if the file is too big, then what OpenAI does, it does what we kind of already have been doing, which is retrieval augmented generation. So they split it, they chunk it, but they hide all of that from you. at the cost, of course, of you don't know what's happening, but you hope that OpenAI is doing some magic that you cannot do outside, but right now that's not clear yet. And then, regardless of what ends up being given to the model, you pay. That becomes part of the context that OpenAI under the hood sends to GPT-4. Now that you have looked at all the components that make the assistant, let's see the assistant in action. What does a thread look like? You do all of this to create the assistant, and then you have a conversation with it. So that's something that is not really that complicated. The word thread makes it more complicated than it is. It's basically just a conversation. It's what you already do with ChatGPT, and the way it works is, you send a message, you get an answer, you send another message, then maybe the brain GPT decides it needs to use one of the tools that you provided, so it does that, and then maybe you send another message, and then it decides to use a file, so it runs the retrieval, and maybe uses another tool and gives you an answer, or maybe you decide to upload a file in the conversation to it, and this file is not shared between conversations, so you include that file in your message, and then maybe ChatGPT uses the tool again and gives you an answer. So in conclusion, the assistant is something that is really not that new. It's something that people were able to kind of create before. We call them agents in a way, using LangChain or using your own code. You did not need, LangChain or things like that also to create them, but that made them easier. And what's happening here is that OpenAI is providing this as part of their API. So they're allowing you to, instead of you keeping the files and doing, deciding what goes into the context and what does not, they're saying, we're basically going to do it for you as a black box. But also there's a cost associated with that could add up a lot, and you have a lot less control over what the context size ends up being right now, at least. But also a lot of it is free until the end of the year, so something to keep in mind. I hope this video helped you understand what is the Assistant API, how similar it is, but how it is basically actually just a wrapper around GPT 3.5 and 4. And maybe in some ways you can see how you can do this without the Assistant API and start to think a little bit maybe about the costs associated with doing this compared to maybe doing it yourself with a little bit extra effort and external libraries, and maybe give and take what you think is worth it and what's not. If you like this, consider subscribing and let me know what other videos you would like to see, and thanks.